In a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other's names, 3 9-year-old triplets lived in a cozy house on the edge of Maple Street. Emma, Liam, and Sophie were inseparable, not just because they looked alike, but also because they shared everything: their laughter, their dreams, and even their secrets. They had always been close to their mother, Sarah, who was both their parent and their best friend. She worked hard during the day as a nurse at the local hospital and spent her evenings reading bedtime stories or helping them with school projects. Life wasn't perfect, but it was full of warmth and love. But there was one thing missing: a father. The triplets didn't know much about him. Whenever they asked Sarah about him, she would either change the subject quickly or give vague answers, like, "He's not here anymore," or "Someday you'll understand." Sometimes when they pressed further, she'd simply say, "Let's focus on what we have now instead of what we don't." Her words made sense to the children, but deep down, they couldn't help wondering. What did he look like? Why wasn't he around? Did he ever think about them? The mystery of their father became a kind of game for the triplets. On rainy afternoons, while sitting by the window watching drops slide down the glass, they would imagine different versions of him. Emma thought he might be an adventurer, traveling across oceans and mountains, too busy saving people to come home. Liam believed he was probably a superhero in disguise, battling villains under the cover of night. Sophie, being the dreamer of the group, pictured him as a musician, strumming his guitar under starry skies and writing songs about how much he missed them. These stories helped fill the empty space inside them, but no matter how creative their imaginations got, they couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing. Life went on this way until one crisp autumn morning when everything changed forever. Sarah woke up feeling unwell, which was unusual because she rarely got sick. Still, she insisted on going to work, saying the hospital needed her. But later that evening, she collapsed suddenly and was rushed back to the very place where she cared for others every day. The doctors tried everything they could, but Sarah passed away that night, leaving behind a hole in the hearts of her children that felt impossible to fill. For weeks afterward, the triplets moved through their days like shadows. Their once bright world seemed dull and gray without Sarah's laughter filling the rooms. Meals were silent, homework went unfinished, and the stories they used to tell each other about their imaginary father stopped altogether. Friends and neighbors tried to comfort them, bringing casseroles and offering hugs, but nothing could replace the loss they felt. For the first time in their young lives, they truly understood what it meant to be alone. Then came the day of Sarah's funeral. It was held in the same church where she had taken them for Sunday services when they were little. The air smelled faintly of candles, and sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. Friends, co-workers, and distant relatives gathered to pay their respects, sharing memories of Sarah's kindness and strength. The triplets sat together in the front row, holding hands tightly as if afraid to let go. Each tear that fell felt like another piece of their heart breaking. When the service ended, everyone slowly made their way outside to the cemetery for the burial. The wind carried fallen leaves across the grass, and the sky was overcast, matching the heaviness in the triplets' chests. As they stood beside their mother's grave, listening to the pastor's final words, Sophie noticed something out of the corner of her eye. At first, she thought it was just another mourner lingering nearby, but then she realized this person wasn't moving toward the group. Instead, he stood off to the side, partially hidden behind a tree, watching silently. Something about him caught Sophie's attention immediately. He wore a dark coat and his head was bowed, almost as if he were trying to avoid being seen. Yet despite his efforts to stay unnoticed, there was something oddly familiar about him. His posture, the way his hands were clasped together nervously, it reminded her of herself when she was unsure of what to do next. Without thinking, Sophie nudged Emma and Liam, pointing subtly toward the man. Both siblings turned to look, their eyes widening in surprise. "Who is that?" Liam whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I don't know," Emma replied, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. "But why is he standing so far away?" Sophie hesitated before speaking. "Do you think, maybe—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish her sentence. The idea forming in her mind seemed too wild to say aloud, yet it wouldn't leave her thoughts. Could this stranger somehow be connected to their mother? Or worse, could he be the man they had spent years imagining but never met? The weight of unanswered questions hung heavy in the air as the triplets continued to stare at the mysterious figure. Whatever his reason for being there, one thing was certain. He had sparked a curiosity in them that couldn't be ignored, and, as the crowd began to disperse, leaving the cemetery quieter and emptier, the man took a hesitant step forward, drawing closer to the grave, and closer to the children whose lives were about to change forever. As the final words of the pastor faded into the chilly autumn air, the triplets stood frozen beside their mother's grave. The silence that followed felt heavy, like a thick fog settling over them. Emma clutched her sibling's hands tightly, her small fingers trembling as she tried to hold back tears. Liam stared at the ground, his jaw clenched, while Sophie kept glancing toward the mysterious man who still lingered near the edge of the cemetery. His presence was unsettling, yet impossible to ignore. The mourners began to drift away one by one, offering quiet condolences as they passed the children. Some patted their shoulders gently. Others gave awkward hugs before leaving flowers or small tokens on Sarah's grave. But the triplets barely noticed. Their focus remained fixed on the stranger whose every movement seemed deliberate and cautious. He didn't approach anyone else, just stood there, watching from a distance, as if waiting for something, or someone. Finally, when most of the crowd had dispersed and only a few stragglers remained, the man took a hesitant step forward, then another, and another. With each step, Sophie's heart raced faster. Her mind buzzed with questions. Who was he? Why was he here? Was he connected to their mother in some way? She glanced at Emma and Liam, silently urging them to say something, but both seemed too stunned to speak. When the man reached the edge of the gravesite, he stopped abruptly, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his dark coat. For a moment he simply stood there, his head bowed as though gathering courage. Then slowly he raised his eyes to meet theirs. What the triplets saw made their breath catch in unison. His face was lined with sadness, but it wasn't just grief. They recognized it was familiarity. There was something about his features, the shape of his nose, the curve of his lips, that reminded them of themselves. "Hi," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry for your loss." Emma frowned, her protective instincts kicking in immediately. "Who are you?" she demanded, her tone sharper than she intended. "Why are you here?" The man flinched at her question, as if bracing himself for rejection. He hesitated for a long moment before answering. "My name is Daniel," he said finally, his gaze flickering between the three children. "And He paused again, swallowing hard. "I'm your father." The words hit them like a thunderclap. At first, none of them moved or spoke. It was as though time itself had stopped, leaving them suspended in disbelief. Liam was the first to react, his face flushing red with anger. "What?" he snapped, his voice rising. "You can't just show up now and say that. Where have you been all this time?" Daniel winced at the accusation in Liam's voice, but he didn't try to defend himself right away. Instead, he looked down at the ground, his expression filled with shame. "I know I don't deserve to be here," he admitted quietly. "But I had to come. I couldn't stay away, not after hearing about Sarah." Hearing their mother's name sent a fresh wave of pain through the triplets. Sophie tightened her grip on Emma's hand, her lower lip quivering. "How did you even know about her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't tell anyone outside of town." Daniel sighed deeply, running a hand through his graying hair. "A mutual friend called me," he explained. "Someone who knew us both back when things were different, they thought I should know." He hesitated again, then added, "I wish I'd known sooner. About everything." His words hung in the air, heavy with regret. Emma crossed her arms over her chest, glaring at him suspiciously. If you really cared, why weren't you here before? She challenged. Why did Mom never talk about you? Why didn't you ever try to find us? Daniel looked as though he'd been struck. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Instead, he sank onto a nearby bench, burying his face in his hands. The triplets exchanged uncertain glances. Part of them wanted to walk away, to leave him sitting there alone, but another part couldn't deny the ache of curiosity pulling them closer. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel finally spoke again. I made a lot of mistakes, he began, his voice rough with emotion. Your mom and I, we loved each other once more than anything. But life got complicated and I let my fears get the better of me. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving, but I see now how wrong I was. He paused, looking directly at the children. I didn't know about you three until recently. If I had, I would have come back in a heartbeat. You have to believe. That, Emma scoffed, rolling her eyes. That's easy to say now, she muttered under her breath. But Sophie, ever the optimist, tilted her head curiously. So you didn't know about us? She asked. Not even a little bit? Daniel shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. No, he replied. Sarah and I lost touch completely after I left. By the time I realized how much I missed her, it was too late. I tried reaching out once or twice, but she never responded. I assumed she'd moved on, built a new life without me. I never imagined she'd had children. Our children. The sincerity in his voice gave Sophie pause. She studied his face carefully, searching for any sign of dishonesty. All she found was raw vulnerability. Beside her, Liam shifted uncomfortably, his anger beginning to soften into confusion. If you didn't know about us, he said slowly, then why are you here now? What do you want from us? Daniel hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said at last. And I don't blame you if you never do. But I need you to know that I'm sorry for everything, for leaving your mom, for not being there for you. I messed up and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try to make things right. Even if it's just a little bit. His honesty caught them off guard. For so long, the triplets had imagined their father as either a hero or a villain, a larger-than-life figure who existed only in their fantasies. But the man sitting in front of them was neither. He was flawed, broken, and painfully human. And yet, despite his mistakes, there was something genuine about him, a desperate longing to reconnect that resonated with the emptiness they felt inside. For several minutes, none of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, scattering leaves across the ground. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, oblivious to the weight of the moment unfolding beneath them. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. What happens now? She asked softly, her voice tinged with hope and uncertainty. Daniel exhaled shakily, offering a tentative smile. That's up to you, he said. I won't push you to trust me or accept me. But if you're willing to give me a chance, even a small one, I promise to do whatever it takes to earn it. Emma glanced at her siblings, silently gauging their reactions. Liam still looked skeptical, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Sophie, however, seemed torn between fear and curiosity. As the oldest triplet, Emma knew the decision rested heavily on her shoulders. Could they really open their hearts to this stranger who claimed to be their father? Or was it safer to keep him at arm's length? We'll think about it, she said finally, her tone firm but not unkind. But don't expect us to forget everything overnight. Daniel nodded, relief washing over his face. Thank you, he whispered. That's all I can ask for. And with that, the four of them stood together in uneasy silence, surrounded by the echoes of the past and the fragile possibility of a future none of them could yet imagine. The days that followed Sarah's funeral were a blur of emotions for the triplets. They returned to their quiet home on Maple Street, where every corner seemed to echo with memories of their mother. The house felt emptier than ever now, its walls unable to contain the weight of their grief, or the questions swirling in their minds about the man who had appeared so suddenly at her grave. Emma, Liam, and Sophie spent hours discussing Daniel, dissecting every word he'd said and every expression on his face. Emma was the most cautious of the three, her natural instinct to protect herself and her siblings keeping her guard firmly up. "We don't know him," she reminded them repeatedly. "Just because he says he's sorry doesn't mean we can trust him." Liam, still simmering with anger, agreed wholeheartedly. "He left Mom when she needed him," he pointed out bitterly. "And now he shows up out of nowhere acting like he cares? It's too late for that." But Sophie saw things differently. She couldn't ignore the pain in Daniel's eyes, or the way his voice cracked when he spoke about their mother. "What if he really is sorry?" she argued softly. "What if he wants to make things right?" Her optimism only fueled more debate. Emma rolled her eyes, muttering something about being naive, while Liam paced the room, his fists clenched. Yet, despite their disagreements, they all felt the same underlying tension, curiosity. No matter how much they resisted it, the idea of having a father, a real, living connection to the missing piece of their family, was impossible to dismiss entirely. A few days later, Daniel called. His voice on the phone was hesitant but warm, as he asked if the triplets would meet him for coffee at a small cafe in town. Emma almost refused outright, but Sophie convinced her to give him one chance. "It's just coffee," she reasoned. "If we don't like what he has to say, we can leave." Reluctantly, Emma agreed, and the next afternoon, the triplets found themselves sitting across from Daniel at a corner table. The cafe smelled of freshly baked pastries and roasted coffee beans, a comforting aroma that did little to ease the awkwardness between them. Daniel fidgeted with his cup, clearly unsure where to begin. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted after a long pause. "I'm glad you did." Emma crossed her arms over her chest, her posture stiff. "Don't read too much into it," she said coolly. "We're here because Sophie wanted us to be." Daniel nodded, accepting her response without argument. "Fair enough," he replied. Then, taking a deep breath, he launched into the story of his life, the parts the triplets had never known. He began by describing how he and Sarah had met years ago, when they were both young and full of dreams. They had fallen madly in love, he explained, sharing everything from late-night conversations to plans for the future. But as time went on, reality set in. Money was tight, and Daniel struggled to find steady work. He started drinking to cope with the stress, which only made things worse. Arguments became frequent, and soon the once happy couple found themselves drifting apart. "One day I realized I was making everything harder for Sarah," Daniel continued, his voice heavy with regret. "She deserved better than the mess I'd become. So I left. I thought it was the right thing to do, to let her start over without me dragging her down. But I was wrong. Leaving was the biggest mistake of my life." As he spoke, the triplets listened intently, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to understanding. Emma's expression softened slightly, though she still looked wary. Liam scowled, clearly wrestling with conflicting emotions, and Sophie leaned forward, hanging on to every word. "When I tried to reach out later," Daniel went on, "she didn't respond. I assumed she'd moved on, built a new life without me. I never dreamed she'd had children. Our children." His voice cracked as he added, "If I'd known, I would have come back immediately. You have to believe that." For a moment, no one spoke. The cafe buzzed around them, other patrons chatting and laughing, oblivious to the weight of the conversation unfolding at the corner table. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. "Why didn't you keep trying?" she asked quietly. "If you loved her so much, why did you stop?" Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off a headache. "Pride, mostly," he admitted. "And fear. I convinced myself she didn't want anything to do with me anymore, that I'd ruined any chance of fixing things. Looking back, I see how selfish that was. I should have fought harder. For her, for you. But I didn't." His honesty struck a chord with the triplets. Emma uncrossed her arms, her defenses lowering just a fraction. Liam shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his anger beginning to ebb. Even Sophie, who had already been leaning toward forgiveness, felt a pang of sympathy for the man sitting across from them. "So what now?" Liam asked gruffly, breaking the quiet. "You show up after all these years and expect us to just welcome you with open arms." "No," Daniel replied quickly. "I don't expect anything. I told you before, I messed up and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. But I want to try to make things right, even if it's just a little bit. If you'll let me." Emma frowned, considering his words. "How do we know you won't disappear again?" she challenged. "How do we know this isn't just another empty promise?" Daniel hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph. It was worn and faded, its edges frayed from years of handling. He slid it across the table toward the triplets. "This is the last picture I have of your mom," he explained. "I've carried it with me everywhere since the day we parted ways. It's a reminder of what I lost and what I'll never take for granted again." The triplets stared at the photo, their hearts aching at the sight of their mother's youthful smile. In the image, Sarah stood beside a younger Daniel, her arm looped through his. Both looked impossibly happy, their faces glowing with love and hope. For the first time, the triplets could see the bond their parents had shared, the kind of connection that transcended time and distance. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Daniel said gently. "Not yet. All I'm asking is for a chance to prove myself, to show you that I'm not the same person I used to be, that I can be someone you might, maybe someday, want in your lives." His vulnerability was palpable, and it touched something deep within each of them. Emma glanced at her siblings, silently seeking their input. Liam shrugged, his earlier hostility replaced by reluctant curiosity. Sophie gave a small nod, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Okay," Emma said finally, her tone measured but not unfriendly. "We'll give you a chance, but don't expect us to forget everything overnight." Daniel exhaled sharply, relief washing over his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "That's all I can ask for." Over the next hour, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Daniel asked about their school, their hobbies, and their favorite memories of Sarah. Slowly but surely, the ice began to melt, and by the time they left the cafe, the triplets weren't ready to call Daniel their father, but they were willing to see where this unexpected journey might lead. As they walked home together under the fading autumn sun, Sophie slipped her hand into Emma's. "Do you think he means it?" she asked softly. Emma squeezed her sister's hand, her gaze thoughtful. "I don't know," she admitted, "but maybe, just maybe, he does." And for the first time in weeks, there was a flicker of hope, a fragile, tentative belief that perhaps their broken family could find a way to heal. Over the next few weeks, Daniel made a conscious effort to stay in touch with the triplets. He didn't push too hard or demand their trust. Instead, he took small, thoughtful steps to show them that he was serious about being part of their lives. Every phone call, every text, and every visit felt like a delicate balancing act, as if one wrong move could shatter the fragile connection they were beginning to build. One Saturday morning, Daniel showed up at their house unannounced, holding a cardboard box. The triplets exchanged wary glances when they saw him standing on the porch. Emma opened the door cautiously, her arms crossed over her chest. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the box in his hands. "It's something I thought you might want to see," Daniel replied, offering a tentative smile. "But only if you're interested." Intrigued despite herself, Emma stepped aside to let him in. Liam and Sophie joined them in the living room where Daniel set the box down on the coffee table. It was old and slightly battered, its surface covered in scratches and faded labels. "This belonged to your mom," he explained. "She gave it to me years ago before everything fell apart. I've kept it all these years, hoping I'd get the chance to give it back to her." The triplets stared at the box, their curiosity piqued. "What's inside?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure," Daniel admitted. "I never opened it, but I think it might be important. For you, especially." Emma hesitated, her protective instincts kicking in. How do we know this isn't some trick? She challenged, narrowing her eyes. How do we know you're not just trying to win us over? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. You don't, he said honestly, and I wouldn't blame you for doubting me. But I promise, I didn't bring this here to manipulate you. I just thought you deserved to have it. Liam frowned, still skeptical, but Sophie reached out and lifted the lid of the box. Inside they found a treasure trove of memories, old photographs, letters, and mementos from Sarah's life. There were pictures of her as a teenager, laughing with friends, ticket stubs from concerts she'd attended, and even a pressed flower tucked between the pages of a notebook. But what caught their attention most were the letters. These are addressed to you, Emma said, pulling out a stack of envelopes marked with Daniel's name. Some had been opened, while others remained sealed. Her tone softened slightly as she added, Mom kept writing to you, even after you left. Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening as he fought back tears. I didn't know, he whispered. If I had, I would have come back sooner, I swear. Sophie picked up one of the unopened letters and turned it over, in her hands. Do you think we should read them? She asked quietly, glancing at her siblings. Emma hesitated, then nodded. Maybe, but not now. Let's look at the rest first. As they continued exploring the contents of the box, they discovered more pieces of their mother's past, and glimpses into the relationship she'd shared with Daniel. One photo, in particular, stood out. It showed Sarah sitting on a park bench, her belly visibly rounded with pregnancy. She looked radiant, her smile wide and carefree. In the background, Daniel stood beside her, his arm draped protectively over her shoulders. She was pregnant with us, Sophie murmured, tracing her finger over the image. And you were there. Daniel nodded, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know it at the time, he said, but looking back I can see it now. That was why she seemed so happy, even though things between us weren't perfect. She must have been carrying you three. The realization hit the triplets, like a tidal wave. For years they had imagined their father as someone who had abandoned them deliberately, without knowing they existed. But the truth was far more complicated and heartbreaking. Their mother had kept their existence a secret, perhaps out of pain or fear, leaving Daniel unaware of the family he had unknowingly created. This changes everything, Liam said finally, breaking the silence. His anger had softened into sadness tinged with confusion. Why didn't Mom tell you? Why did she keep us hidden? Daniel shook his head, his expression filled with regret. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe she thought I wasn't ready, or maybe she didn't want to burden me after everything that happened. All I know is that I wish she had told me. Knowing about you, it would have changed my entire life. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Emma, Liam, and Sophie sat in stunned silence, processing the new reality unfolding before them. They had spent years imagining their father as either a hero or a villain, but now they were beginning to see him as something else entirely, a flawed, complicated human being who had made mistakes, just like everyone else. As the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The initial tension gave way to a sense of cautious understanding. Sophie flipped through the notebook they had found, marveling at the doodles and notes scrawled in her mother's handwriting. Look, at this, she said, pointing to a page filled with sketches of tiny baby booties and onesies. She was planning for us. Liam leaned closer, his scowl softening into a faint smile. She really wanted us, he murmured. Even when things were tough, she still chose us. Emma nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She loved us more than anything, she agreed. Then, turning to Daniel, she added, and you loved her. Even if you messed up, you still cared about her. Daniel met her gaze, his own eyes brimming with gratitude. More than you'll ever know, he said softly. And because of that love, I want to make things right for her sake and for yours. For the first time since meeting Daniel, The triplets allowed themselves to entertain the possibility of forgiveness. Not fully, not yet, but enough to consider letting him into their lives. They spent the rest of the day sorting through the box, sharing stories and memories sparked by its contents. By the time evening fell, the house felt less empty, less haunted by the absence of their mother. Instead, it was filled with laughter, tears, and the quiet hope of healing. As Daniel prepared to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at the triplets with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said. "I know it's not easy, trusting me after everything, but I promise I'll do whatever it takes to earn that trust." Emma exchanged a glance with her siblings before replying. "We're not promising anything," she said firmly. "But maybe we can try, just a little bit." Daniel smiled, relief washing over his face. "That's all I can ask for," he replied. And as he walked away, the triplets couldn't help but feel a flicker of optimism, a fragile, tentative belief that perhaps their broken family could find a way to mend itself. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a more consistent presence in the triplets' lives. He didn't rush or push them to accept him, but instead focused on small gestures that showed he was genuinely invested in their well-being. Every interaction felt like a step forward, though progress was slow and often uncertain. The triplets were still grappling with conflicting emotions: anger, curiosity, sadness, and hope, all swirling together in a confusing mix. One afternoon, Daniel invited the children to join him for ice cream at a local parlor they had passed countless times but never visited. It was a simple outing, yet it carried an air of significance. For Emma, Liam, and Sophie, it felt like crossing an invisible line, a decision to give this man another chance, even if only for a few hours. The shop was warm and inviting, with colorful walls adorned with pictures of sundaes and milkshakes. A cheerful bell jingled as they walked in, and the sweet scent of waffle cones filled the air. Daniel let the triplets choose their flavors first, watching intently as they debated between chocolate fudge brownie and strawberry cheesecake. His eagerness to please was almost endearing, though Emma still eyed him warily from across the table. They sat down with their treats. Daniel cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he began, stirring his coffee-flavored scoop absent-mindedly. "If you're okay with it, I'd like to start helping out more. Maybe help with homework or take you to your activities. Just little things." Liam raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You're offering to help us now? After all these years?" Daniel nodded, meeting his son's gaze without flinching. "Yes. I know I can't make up for lost time, but I want to be here for you moving forward, if you'll let me." Sophie smiled faintly, her heart softening just a little. "That sounds nice," she admitted. "It's hard doing everything alone." Emma shot her a sharp look, then turned back to Daniel. "We're not helpless," she said firmly. "We've managed fine without you so far." "I'm not saying you are," Daniel replied quickly. "You three are incredibly strong. But everyone needs support sometimes, even strong people. And I'd like to be that person for you, if you'll allow it." His words hung in the air, sincere and heartfelt. Emma studied him closely, searching for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she sighed and looked away. "Fine," she muttered. "But don't expect us to act like nothing happened." "Never," Daniel promised. "I don't deserve that." Their ice cream outing marked the beginning of a new routine. Over the following days, Daniel started showing up after school, bringing snacks and asking about their day. At first, the triplets were hesitant, unsure how to navigate this strange dynamic. But slowly they began opening up, sharing snippets of their lives, their favorite subjects, their least favorite teachers, and the challenges they faced balancing schoolwork with household chores. One evening, while helping Liam practice math problems, Daniel noticed how frustrated his son was becoming. "Hey," he said gently, placing a hand on Liam's shoulder. "Take a deep breath. You're doing great. Let's break it down step by step." Liam hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Together they worked through the problem, and when Liam finally solved it, a flicker of pride crossed his face. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to have a father who cared. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Meanwhile, Sophie found herself looking forward to the quiet moments she shared with Daniel. They would sit together in the backyard, talking about random topics like constellations and favorite books. One afternoon, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sophie ventured a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if you hadn't left Mom?" she asked, softly, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. Daniel paused, staring at the horizon. "All the time," he admitted. "There's not a day that goes by when I don't wonder what could have been. Sometimes I picture our family, me, your mom, and the three of you, living in a cozy house somewhere, having dinner together, laughing at silly jokes. But then I remind myself that wishing won't change the past. All I can do is focus on making today better." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. Though his answer didn't erase the pain of his absence, it gave her some comfort knowing he carried those same what-ifs in his heart. Emma, however, remained the hardest to win over. She kept her guard up, testing Daniel at every turn to see if his intentions were genuine. One Saturday morning, she challenged him to fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen, a task Sarah had always handled herself. To her surprise, Daniel rolled up his sleeves and got to work, muttering under his breath as he wrestled with the stubborn pipes. When the faucet finally stopped dripping, Emma couldn't hide her begrudging admiration. "You're actually kind of useful," she remarked dryly, though there was a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Daniel chuckled, wiping his hands on a wheel. "Glad to hear it," he replied. "Does this mean I get to come back next week?" Emma shrugged, pretending to consider the question. "Maybe," she said nonchalantly. "Depends on whether you bring pizza." Her attempt at humor made Daniel laugh, and for the first time Emma felt a tiny crack in the wall she had built around her heart. Maybe, just maybe, this man wasn't so bad after all. As the weeks turned into a month, the triplets began noticing subtle changes in their relationship with Daniel. Trust was still fragile, but it was growing bit by bit. They started including him in their routines, asking for advice on projects or tagging along when he ran errands. In return, Daniel made sure to listen carefully, respecting their boundaries while gently nudging them to open up. One evening, as they gathered around the dining table for a homemade spaghetti dinner, courtesy of Daniel, Sophie looked at her siblings and their father and felt a warmth she hadn't experienced since before their mother's passing. "This feels kind of normal," she said aloud, voicing what everyone else was thinking. "It does," Emma agreed, surprising even herself. "Almost like we're a family again." Daniel's eyes softened and he reached across the table to squeeze Sophie's hand. "That's my greatest hope," he said quietly. "Not to replace what you lost, but to add something meaningful to what you already have." For the first time in a long time, the triplets allowed themselves to believe that healing was possible, that despite the scars of the past, they could find joy and connection once more. And as they laughed and talked late into the night, it felt like the first chapter of a brand new story, one written with love, patience, and second chances.